Hello, and welcome to the post-council meeting news conference. We do this after every meeting in the Marshfield Common Council, which means roughly every 2 weeks. I just had a meeting on Tuesday night, November 8th, and I'm joined today by Mike Warren from the Hub City Times. We'll be going over the discussion items and the action items so that you get caught up on what happened at what was really two meetings. First of all, a budget meeting at 5 o'clock, and then a regular meeting at 7 o'clock. So Mike, take it away.
All right, thanks, Steve. Always enjoy the opportunity to, I don't know, just kind of ask a few questions and, you know, sort of flesh out some of these details for folks who are sort of, you know, paying attention to what's happening in the city. So let's start with the regular meeting. So there, like you said, there were two meetings on Tuesday the 8th. Let's start with a regular council meeting, and it was not an overly long agenda.
No.
But, you know, you bring up the file and you start watching the meeting and you go, an hour and 40 minutes? You know, what did they talk about for an hour based on these few things, you know, including a lot of first readings, which normally don't get a lot of attention.
Correct.
Because there, you know, there are certain things that go through several rounds, several hearings, and a couple of those, and then that's really what took center stage at the meeting. I don't know where you want to begin, but let's start there with a couple of items that did get a lot of a discussion, and I guess they had really, both of them had to do with committees, and who should serve on, you know, what, and where should they live, and then the other one was, should we have an audit committee? So a lot of talk about committees during that meeting.
Yeah, Mike, there was. We have a lot of committees, boards, and commissions here at the city, and they do a lot of the legwork. I think you and I have talked about this in the past. Really doing the things that get necessary, I should say, to bring to the council, to bring to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, or the Board of Public Works, kind of bubbling up those items, whether it be expenditures, policies, new ideas. And we're very grateful for the private citizens who are willing to be on these committees. Well, we've had a couple of meetings now that have taken quite a lot of discussion about who ought to be on the committees. Typically, the vast majority of our members are residents of the city. They live within the corporate limits of the city of Marshfield. But 4 years ago, we adopted a policy that said, you know what, if one of two things is happening, we can look at having non-residents on those committees. One, we can't find a resident to serve. And really through the 12 years I've been here, all three mayors I've dealt with, Chris Meyer, Bob McManus, and now Lois Teestrake, have said to me, it's hard to find members. I mean, sometimes trying to get people to fill these vacancies is pretty difficult. So if we can't find a resident of the city, we could look for a non-resident. The other thing is, what if a non-resident has background, qualifications, experience that would help the committee? Let's say you're talking about the Economic Development Board, and there's a person who lives just outside the city limits, but he or she has background in banking, finance, real estate, things that can help us to do deals, to bring new companies to town. That might be the kind of person you want on that board. But if you look at a policy that says, no, they don't live within the city limits, next topic, you're going to rule them out. So the council and others have been trying to come to grips with, when would you allow non-residents to be on the committee? There's been suggestions, well, what if you don't live in the city limits, but you own a business in the city, you manage a business in the city? Is not that akin to being a resident? What if you live within so many miles of the city? What if you have a business interest in a business that's not even owner-manager, but for some reason you have a vested interest, I'll use a word that we'll probably talk about in a minute, that you are committed to the city of Marshfield. You care a lot about this community. Would we allow that? And this has kind of taken on a life of its own. After the meeting on October, I think it was 27th or thereabouts, the city attorney drew up an ordinance based upon what council said that night. And yet you heard the other night where they're still tweaking that and having disagreements. So it's really a broad topic.
So where did they leave it? Well, actually, I think they left it, it was a first reading, right? So they left it nowhere. It'll come back on its own. Yeah,
they made a few comments, and I don't know if there were votes taken. I can't remember. It was a long discussion, but about things that they may want to see included or taken out of that proposed ordinance. But nothing was finalized. I expect a fairly similar type of discussion on the 22nd of November, and hopefully we'll come to finality in terms of what will work for everybody. Because I do think that members of the council see this very differently in terms of how often and under what conditions they would allow non-residents to be on their committees and boards.
Yeah, because I think one of the points that was made was like, okay, people, these business owners, you know, maybe they own property, you know, 20, 30 miles outside the city. That's where they live. You know, they live on the flowage. They live wherever. These are some good business-minded people who could contribute if they wanted to. So that situation, I don't want to say it's rare, but it's rare. But still, you never know. You could get that person that says, "Hey, I'd like to serve, and I think I got something to offer, and I ran a business for 30 years or whatever, and I'd like to throw my name in the hat, so to speak." Well, hard to say no to something like that.
It is, and one of the things that was brought up was, what if it was the owner of Menards? You know, Menards owns, and someone like, are you kidding? We're talking about the owner of Menards? Well, I mean, it's an extreme example, but would you want somebody who probably lives hundreds of miles away from the city to be a member of a committee or board? Now, theoretically, they would decline it because they can't make the meetings, and they would probably feel awkward trying to be a board member of a group in central Wisconsin if they live in Florida or wherever. I have no idea where he lives, but it was to prove the point that how far do you take this business owner or manager? You want someone who has got a real concern and a real involvement in the city, and I get that part, but how do you put that down into words? Right,
because like you said, John Menard could walk in and say, "I own a business in the city of Marshfield."
Yeah. And
that's all you need, So, but the other point that was made there was, well, look, the council has the final say, right? I think it was Attorney Wolfgram who said, "You have the final say. You don't have to let him on. You can still say no, even if he is in the running."
Yeah, you're not obligated to take John Menard. Nothing against him, but you can look at that appointment and say, "No, I don't think that individual would be best fit because they're not even around our community."
Okay.
So I mean, I think you're going to hear a lot more on the 22nd. I'm saying that not to try and predict, but I think there's still some pieces that are going to be debated before we get to the final wording.
Well, here, and I'll just point that I've said this before, and maybe it's worth repeating, but why people are maybe sitting there going, "Look, I just watched a council meeting where they discussed this thing forever, ad nauseum, right? And then they did it again on the 8th, right? And now they're going to do it again."
Yep.
But the council is one thing, right? All these committees and boards and commissions, that's where really a lot of the work, the heavy lifting is getting done. A lot of what happens in the city and where the direction the city is going in, what's decided, a lot of that is done at the committee level. And that's why it's important, and that's why maybe they're having so much discussion on who should be on these committees or who shouldn't, based on the fact that, look, that's really where the rubber meets the road in many respects when it comes to the city of Marshfield.
True, and we use three words kind of interchangeably sometimes, but we ought not. Committee, board, commission. They have different responsibilities and different authority levels. And you talk about the Economic Development Board or the Police and Fire Commission or the Utilities Commission. They have specific authorities granted to them regarding things like electric and water rates. They interact directly with the PSC. Police and fire with optional powers. They have the autonomy as far as management and oversight of the fire and police operations. And the Economic Development Board has a pot of money that they can, to some degree anyway, administer to try and grow the community. So these are very different than some of the ones like Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, a great group of people. But that committee normally bubbles up recommendations to other bodies. So some of these really have their own independent authority as part of what they do, making them even more important.
Good point. A commission is not a committee.
Correct.
A commission has, like you said, sort of its own set of rules that it can play by without really needing to go to the council at all.
Yeah, think about some of the things that we've talked about in the last 4 or 5 years regarding Police and Fire Commission. I mean, they have a lot of authority, and sometimes they have bumped heads with the council and vice versa because of that level of authority versus what the council's authority is. So these are very important appointments, and I think nailing down who is eligible is an important thing.
And that's important to mention, though, and there's a reason for that, because you really want to take politics, so to speak, right, out of things like public service. You don't want to make police and fire services or utility services a political hot potato, so to speak, and that's the last thing you want, right? So
Yeah,
there's a
and
reason
that-
it's set up like that, and it's not a local thing, isn't
Right.
it? Isn't it? It's the
There's
state says.
there's a local piece and
Okay.
a state piece. But
Okay.
if you think about police and fire, and I may be irritating people when I say this because there have been some different disagreements in the last couple of years, but the whole idea of having what's so-called optional powers is that, do you want the mayor, for example, calling the police chief and saying, hey, look, today you get down to 3rd Avenue and you do this and you do that or whatever. I'm not saying that would happen, but you like to try and take some of that political thing out of it and put it in the hands of a commission that's separate from the political environment. Having said that, there are certainly arguments that have been made, and they're good ones sometimes, for the fact that the councils voted on, they're selected by the public in a very direct way. Ought not they have more direct control over what happens in those operations? So I'm not trying to make a value judgment. I'm just really emphasizing how important those particular positions are.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you mentioned that word vested before, and it's really an important word because I think it was Attorney Wolfgram who first mentioned it, and when I first heard it, I thought, okay, here we go. Yeah, because and he gave the council credit for, he said you have done historically a good job.
Right.
At vetting, I think was
Vetting,
the actual word.
correct.
But it got to vested, and it got to the, kind of who do we want on these committees and that sort of thing, and it sort of. I'm not sure if it came up in that committee discussion or in the next thing we're going to talk about, which was creating an audit committee, which is also the other big part of the meeting. Again, a lot of discussion about committees and who should be on them, and now creating a new one, an audit committee. Are we ready to go into that discussion? Do you want to?
Yeah,
the audit committee part of this.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Okay. Because that was also a first. That was a first reading that was brought up. First time they're hearing about it, and it was actually presented by Council President Wagner. Yep. So maybe just talk a little bit about audit committee. What were some of the reasons for wanting this or bringing this forward, and maybe you can vet.
Yeah, there you go.
Some of that discussion for us.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, for people who follow us, you probably know this already, but in the past 3 or 4 years, we've had some different issues come up involving finances. The big one that really kicked it off was back in early 2019 when we became aware of the fact that the debt payments on our tax increment financing districts were not being handled perfectly. Monies were being kind of commingled in places where they ought not be. And that brought up the idea of whether or not the auditor could have caught this. Could the financial advisor have caught this? What was city staff's role? All these kind of things. So that kind of put auditing under a little bit of scrutiny. Fast forward a couple of years to where we have this issue with the municipal court clerk, who is, has been charged with crimes for potentially embezzling money. And we have now the latest, the EMS fund, ambulance fund, if you will, that we have fallen behind a little bit, and we're not in as good a place as we thought we were from an accounting standpoint. And all these things have brought into question, what does the auditor do? Who's overseeing the audit? Who's overseeing the audit process? So I think what Council President Wagner is saying is, let's add another level of oversight and have a group of 3 people, at least one of who's got a lot of financial experience, kind of overseeing the process. They're not going to be staring over the auditor's shoulder and saying, now did you add 3 + 5 on that one? But their job is to make sure that they're looking over the process, interacting with the auditors, interacting with city staff to see that everything's being done, properly according to policy, and that there's another level of oversight. Then there was a lot of discussion between Mr. Wagner and others about, is that necessary? What are the benefits from it? Why don't we just leave it the way it is with an auditor and city staff reporting to the council? And I think his argument is, we've got some problems, and not blaming anybody, but another level of oversight is probably not a bad thing. So that was really what the heart of that conversation was about.
And again, first reading, so that comes back at the 22nd meeting, right?
Correct. And I don't think there was a whole lot of heartburn over that one. Council member Fisher brought up some questions that he's been hearing from people. I think really trying to get at, are we creating something useful, or is this just another layer of government? People get tired of hearing about layers of government. Oh, we got another committee. That's all City Hall does, is has committees. What are the benefits? And I think Mr. Wagner explained it to some degree, and there was more Q&A. But I think it probably will ultimately be approved on the 22nd. We'll see if there's any changes made to it.
Yeah, okay. Well, and I think one of the points made in favor of it was, look what's happened. What are we not seeing that maybe somebody with a financial background would see, that these I mean, we do have an audit done, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
There's a firm that gets hired by the city every year that
Correct.
does an audit, right? Obviously, those folks are missing stuff too. I don't know. Without getting into the whole blame game,
Right.
Whose fault is it that we missed? But somebody missed something somewhere. I think one of the points in favor of this was, well, look, and not only that, this wouldn't be an audit like a firm that does audits.
No,
This would be
no.
an independent, just
Totally.
works like for the council.
Right.
And reports to the council, doesn't have any other interest in it other than that. And maybe we do need an independent auditor to try to see some of the stuff that somebody's missing now.
The reason I think that this is going to get approved, Mike, is because of a four-word thing, what can it hurt? In other words, if they find some really important stuff, great. They can help us deal with problems that we wouldn't otherwise see. If they don't, I mean, what are we out?
Yeah,
We had 3 people get involved, one of at least who's a professional financial type person, and they can say, you know what, we took a look at it, we were there when they came here for the field work or whatever they do, and we feel good about the, what happened here. So at the very least, it can be not a negative. I think that's why I think they're ultimately going to approve it. There's no harm in adding a layer, regardless of what we do or do not find out.
Well, speaking of layers of bureaucracy,
Yes.
or committees, I'll just mention this since it kind of goes with the discussion we're on. But at the end of the meeting on the 8th, did they also not, I think they want to talk at the next meeting about the ethics committee and get an update on what that group has been up to since they created that one a year or so ago.
Yeah, and I'll definitely give that report. When we created the ethics board a couple of years ago, we had a lot of meetings at first. They met monthly, but a lot of that was training. They had like people come in with a speaker, an attorney, whatever, and getting them familiar with laws and what they ought to be doing to make sure that they're doing these hearings correctly if they're hearing a case. We expect to have 2 types of complaints. One, where a person kind of does a finger in the wind and says, hey, I might be in a bad spot. Can you help me? Do I need to back away from talking about this contract because my brother-in-law works for whatever? And then the other one where they've already done something and we're kind of retroactively saying, you know what, this board needs to take a look at whether or not you violated ethical standards and where that goes. But what's happened since that an early grouping of meetings, Mike, is we really haven't had many cases. I think we might have had 1 case. But the idea was that after they got trained, they would meet on an as-needed basis. And they're not going to come and get together and say, well, everything's still good. It's been long enough to where we probably should have a meeting and make sure that everybody's on board still and that they know what they're doing. But I don't think we've had a need for a hearing in a long time. That's why we haven't seen more activity.
Okay. So that'll, again, be part of the discussion on the 22nd,
Correct.
right? The other thing, we're talking about audit services, there's also this issue of, and we'll move on to the next item here that got a little discussion, revaluation services. And actually, I don't think it got a lot of discussion. I can't remember if they approved this or you're going to come back with it because you basically put out this, you asked for proposals.
Right.
To do a revaluation of the city?
Yep, a full reval.
Okay.
Well, I say a full reval, not a full reval the way people normally talk about it, where you try to get into every home in the city.
Okay.
But a reval of all the property in the
Where they go around and just kind of eyeball everything?
They'll do some exterior reviews, but a lot of what they're going to do here is more internal. It's more statistical analysis. They'll get all the sale information, everything, and then they'll look at 2 stories versus ranches versus Cape Cods or whatever, and make an assessment. And they've got good property records. They will go out and do some looking around. The reason people don't do as many full revals as they used to now, Mike, is because state law a couple of years ago changed to where you and I don't have to let people in our house. Assessor used to knock on the door, hey, I'm the assessor, I want to take a look and see if you've remodeled. Go away. You're no longer required to allow that person in your home. So they're getting, places that are doing the old style full revals are getting 30 or 40% at best, people allowing entry onto the properties. So a lot of people are going to more of a, where you go around and look outside to see if you see any changes that are obvious. Otherwise, you go back to the card records, you do statistical, and you probably get more people saying, you're increasing mine by $30,000. Well, you want to let me in? I mean, that's the best I can do from what I'm seeing here and what I'm looking at. If you want to let me in, I'll take a review. Maybe it's in your favor. But it's really called more of an interim or intermediate type of review. And we only got one proposal. I sent it out to more than a dozen firms. Forward Appraisal, who is our current maintenance company, they do our day-to-day assessing on a contract basis. They're out of Green Bay, but they do the assessing for Point and Rapids as well. And they put a proposal in. The council directed me to bring that proposal to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee on the 15th for review. And I would presume they're going to be favorable. They may have some things to throw back at the firm and say, look, here's some questions we have or whatever. But we are now out of compliance for our 4th year, which means for 4 years our assessed value has been 90% or less of what the state says we ought to be at. As you know, as inflation and appreciation of property has gone up, our assessed value has lagged. So if we didn't do this ourselves, the state would be saying very soon to us, we're going to mandate that you do this.
In other words, our properties in the city are undervalued.
Correct.
According to the state. And they probably are anyway, right?
They are, and that happens because, again, they appreciate over time, plus just inflation.
Yeah.
You know, we all know the market lately. At least a few months ago, I'm not sure if it's still true, but people were putting up properties and getting people offering more than the asking price. Well, you can buy my house for $250. I'll give you $275. Well, okay. And so we're beginning to see that what we have these properties assessed at is really below market rate. And that's really the need for us to do that. It's not a big windfall. Again, I want to say this. It's not a big windfall of tax revenue to the city. So if you're sitting at home thinking, yeah, right, my home is valued at $200,000. Now you're going to say it's worth $240,000, and I'm going to be hit with a big tax bill. That's not how it works. What will happen is probably all properties will go up to a fair degree, and we'll be taking this pie that's really confined by the state of Wisconsin through levy limits and kind of there'll probably be some winners and losers to mild degrees, but for the most part, it's not a windfall of revenue for the city. That's not how it works.
Okay. And it's not a big hit on our pocketbook either in term, right? If it's
right.
Not a
right.
If it's not a big windfall for the city, it's not a big charge for us.
Right.
It's maybe, I don't know. Is it even dollars? It's probably cents.
Well, you know,
I don't know, maybe
right now
maybe a few bucks.
Right now, the state allows us to levy about $11 million in general property taxes.
Okay.
So next year, what can we levy? Will probably be that plus a little bit more because we have growth. That we have, you know, there's a new subdivision going in or new homes going in. We get a little bit more added to be able to service that. But we couldn't come along and say, wow, we got the assessed value now. We can levy $13 million, and you know, but we'll get no.
Yeah,
all we're really doing is taking the roughly finite pie and recarving it a little bit.
All right. All right. There were a couple of closed session items that got votes after the meeting, right?
And I can comment on those, which is kind of rare. One of them is a property that we sometimes refer to the Yellowstone Crossing site. It's at 2204 Yellowstone Drive in the industrial park area. It's kind of an oddly configured 6-acre lot. And we did get a proposal that we are accepting to go forward and sell to an individual who does not have immediate plans but is looking to build sometime soon. And so we'll be selling that parcel. And then there's another one down by the wastewater plant that we weren't actively marketing it, but somebody came along and said, hey, you know, I'd like to buy that. I have a business use for it. It's only 4 acres, and made our asking price, you know, what we were wanting for it, general for industrial land. And so we're taking that as well. So that'll be 2 parcels of land that we're going to sell. It'll bring a pretty fair amount of revenue to the city to recoup some of our expenses in those TIF districts. I think nearly $300,000 total for those 2, and that'll help us to pay off the debt in those TIDs.
Okay. Again, not another big windfall. It's paying off debt that you've already spent.
True, but it gets them on the tax roll.
Yeah.
Besides getting the immediate sale price, it's good to have, even if there's not imminent building that's going to occur on these sites, it does provide tax revenue being paid for by someone instead of it just being a 0 on the tax roll.
Yeah.
So.
We mentioned the fact that they wanted to take a look at the Ethics Committee on the 22nd. There were also a few other suggested items for the. It's an actual agenda item.
I know.
Suggested items for future agendas. They
Yep.
talk about agenda items as an agenda item, and one was I think getting an update on the fair.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, there were a few others. Do you remember the list?
Oh, they were. And one of them was brought up by Mike O'Reilly during the regular part of the meeting, and then he followed up at the end. And that is, we had a young man who died recently from an overdose. And but it's been really heartbreaking for this community, and there's been an outpouring of affection and caring for the individuals, the family members, and others. As part of that, there were some students and others, I think, who went to the skate park and did, kind of painting murals and did some other decorations. I haven't been there, so I don't know all that they did. Well, now it's been a few weeks since that's over, and the Park and Recreation Department is thinking, well, we need to clean that up a little bit. We don't want...
All they see is graffiti is what...
Right, I call it murals, and they...
I think
correct.
the word...
No, the word is graffiti.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, that's the word. I mean, I'm not there. I said murals just now, but they looked at it and they understood people want to get out their sadness and they want to really honor the individual who died. But after a month or so now, the Park and Recreation Department's been making plans to clean that up, to paint.
Based on complaints, right?
Correct.
They did. There have been...
True. They're not doing this on their own.
Okay.
I don't know how many complaints they've had, but painting over the areas and doing some other stuff. And then Mike O'Reilly, one of our council members, said, "Well, I get why you would do that. I understand it, but again, I mean, these people did this to honor this individual. Is there a way we can look at it differently than just repainting over the graffiti, so to speak?" And so he's been asking for a report. So it's going to start with a report from Justin Casperson, our Parks and Recreation Director. He'll be coming to the next meeting. We'll talk about it. I think Mike made the suggestion that maybe there be a committee put together of what to do next. Yes, we can't let it stay the way it is right now, but what can we do to be honoring to the people who really felt pain and anguish from what happened? So we'll see where that goes.
All right. Yeah, and then I think it was Rebecca Spiros asked about the fair, and I know there was one other issue.
Update on our legal issues.
Oh, yes. And Adam Fisher wanted an update on all legal matters.
All legal matters.
It's not good when he says all. I mean,
no, I know.
Not like there's a lot, but it's been significant in recent years.
Yeah, we have the clinic case on the tax matter, and we still have, we don't talk about this much here, but we do have 2 ongoing cases that involve the former police chief and some things that came from that. More the private actions being taken against the city of Marshfield that we're still dealing with because those go on for quite a while. So looking for an update on those cases where we stand, and I'll give that in closed session. The other one, Dale, I've talked to Dale Christensen, the executive director of the Central Wisconsin State Fair, and he did agree to give an update. How did the 2022 fair go, financially and otherwise? How did we do? And but we hadn't nailed down a date. It was brought up again. Can we get that one coming forward? So I'll try to get him here before the end of the year to do a report to the council in open session.
Boy, graffiti, ethics, legal matters, audits, who should be on committees, who shouldn't, vetting and vested. And it sounds like that's going to be another marathon meeting on the 22nd, too.
Yeah, when I talk to people who become council members, they come in my office and I say, can I ask you, why'd you run for council? And because I like to hear, is it because you've got a lot of feelings for economic development, or are you passionate about public safety? What drove you to want to throw your hat in the ring? And I get all different kinds of answers. But a lot of times people will have, maybe they'll have one focus. My biggest thing is our finances. I want to get our finances in a good place. But when you get on council, you're not just going to be talking about finance. You're going to be talking about ethics boards and graffiti and whatever. You got to be ready when you come on. I'm not trying to scare people from running for council, but when you come on board, there's a full range of topics that you're going to have to be ready for, not just the 2 or 3 things that you might have been thinking when you filed.
Yeah, no, there's all kinds of stuff. Speaking of that, do you want to go into, maybe just give us a little update on, I know you've been having budget meetings.
Yep.
There have been a series of meetings, and I think you had one on the 8th too, right? Before
Correct.
The regular meeting, with special council meeting,
Yep.
Where basically it's continue review and consideration of recommended 2023 budget. Without going over every line item here, this looks, I've got what do I got? Just part of it?
Yeah, probably true.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that or not, but you don't want to look. You'll go blind. But maybe just a general update on where things are at. And we're getting to that critical point in the budget process now where people can come out and say, my turn, right?
Yeah, right. And the 3rd budget meeting happened on November 1st. And because of a change of date, I was not available for that meeting. I was actually out of town. And, I had recommended approval of the budget with using a certain amount of fund balance, a little under $400,000, and then about $435,000 in ARPA funds. That's the federal program that came out of COVID to try and repurpose and use for some projects that were within the general fund. Not ideal. I mean, truthfully, you can move the shells around, but you realize it's not perfect. And although the borrowing from or the tapping into general fund reserves is not uncommon for us. So, but what happened at that third meeting is the council said, you know what, we're uncomfortable with this. We've got to do more to right the ship in terms of our long-term financing, and that's fine. So they made a motion that we would, directing staff to cut 4% of the general fund budget, which is actually $960,000, a little bit more than the ARPA and fund balance applied combined. And so staff for about a week has been working on trying to prepare a list of cuts. Now, as you can imagine, some of the ones we look at, Mike, and say, yeah, we could do this. We could do without 3,000 here or 5,000 there. Others that we put on this list are things that we said, well, here's the list.
Oh, that's what I've got, the list?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they include things like,
So that's the cut list, so
correct,
to speak.
Correct.
Oh,
and they include
okay.
things like not refilling positions right away, maybe eliminating curbside brush and yard waste pickup, cutting the hours a little bit at Van de Hey Waters, not great, but a little cut, those kind of things. And that's not that staff wants to do that. Like, hey, let's cut Van de Hey Waters and let's stop picking up brush at the curb. But it's very difficult to get to $960,000 without that kind of stuff because our budget just doesn't have all that much in it that you would tap into. So we presented the list, and I totally respect the council for wanting to go through this and see if there's not some other savings to get ourselves to a better financial place. So on Tuesday night, they talked about all this. Well, I shouldn't say they talked a lot. They listened to the staff walk through this line by line. And then Tom Witzel went around and gave every council member a chance to ask questions or to make comments. Many of them did. And they gave us an indication of things that they might be supportive of, things that they might not be supportive of. But they didn't make any decisions. And to their credit, I have to say, they did a good job of Q&A without seeing this sheet that you're looking at until the very last minute. Because I apologize for this, but it took us a while out of that 6 days to put this together. So they said, hey, look, let's wait till Thursday. Let's give ourselves 2 days, come back on Thursday night. So, I mean, by the time people see this program, that meeting on the 10th may have already happened. But at that meeting, Mike, they have to make decisions because we need to publish the budget 15 days in advance of the public hearing. And the public hearing needs to be held by December 1st. So they can't have the meeting on the 10th and say, well, good discussion. Let's schedule another meeting for a week from today. That can't happen. We're up against the deadline for publishing, having the hearing, and then 2 weeks to prepare the tax bills. So it was a good discussion. I'm not sure where council is going to come in. I think some of them are going to want to see all the cuts, maybe. Some are going to want to see some cuts, maybe others not so much at all. But they'll be making the final decisions, and I'm sure that they'll do it thoughtfully based upon their evaluation of what these cuts would do to the public or not do to the public.
Yeah, and there's just a quick glance over it, and there's a little bit of everything here. Again, without going into detail, but you look at 1,000 here. Even would be a savings of $160, right?
Yeah.
As little as $40, right?
Yeah.
But then as high as I see a 70,000, 88,000. I see 135,000.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest one I see. But my point in saying that is it all adds up. And when you get to the end, 959, 919. Well, you said 4% is 960. There it is, right there. Let's just, here's the list, cut it.
And they can do that. They can absolutely do that. There could be a 5-minute meeting where they say, let's do it. I think they'll probably look at it and see that not all cuts are the same. Right. Some have impacts. Some impact our internal operations. Some impact the citizens. I mean, they may hear from people saying, really, do we want to cut back on brush collection or whatever? But they'll have to weigh the benefits and the cost, and I know they'll do it very thoughtfully and make decisions that they think are best for our community. And what amount will be cut? I don't know. I do want to remind our taxpayers of something I think I've said before on one of these programs. None of this will affect the ultimate tax rate because levy limits have tied our hands as far as how much we can levy from the property tax payments. So our tax rate is going to go up about 1%. And that's baked in. It's not if they adopt this list of cuts or they don't adopt it, it's not going to go to 3% or 0%. We're maxing out the levy to try and keep our services going, but that will be very close to a 1% increase in the tax rate.
Yeah, because the state says
you can only levy.
You can't tax and spend, for what you need. There's got to be we're going to put a limit on it. And you're right. It ties your hands as to what you can do. So I don't. In a way,
I don't want to sound harsh toward Madison. I've probably done that before because I respect our legislators greatly. But the fact that the state aid payments are relatively flat,
Yeah.
and you're limited on even taxing yourself by levy limits, I mean, it's a difficult dynamic to work with. It is.
Right.
But we'll do our best, and we're trying to make this work.
I mean, all the way from, I'll just throw a few things out. Again, I don't want to, it's not I don't want to throw, what am I trying to say? It's not like fear factor here.
Right,
where
no,
say,
right.
hey, look, you do this or else, but okay, you don't fill a position, right? There's an associate planner position, for instance.
Right.
88.5.
Not filling it all
salary
year.
and benefit,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay, that's a big chunk. Nice, good way to start, maybe. But then all the way down to, there's about 22,000 here a year. And again, it's not a lot, but it would help. That goes to Marshfield School District, Civic Band, the Northwood County Historical Society. Macy gets 3,300. I mean, little things like that. I saw something in here about snow and ice control to the tune of
Reducing
56,000. I mean,
buying a little bit less salt.
yeah, everything is.
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking at everything,
Yeah.
and so those are just a few examples of what they're talking about.
Yeah, and the ones you mentioned, like Macy and the Upper Mansion and the school, I mean the Civic Band.
Yep.
Hey, music in the park at Columbia, that's great.
Yep.
These are all really good things, but there's no way staff could bring forward a list of almost $1 million in cuts and not include those when we're already cutting parks and streets. So it doesn't mean I don't want those things. It doesn't mean council doesn't want those things, but these are difficult decisions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the budget. So those discussions are. There's another meeting.
Yeah, there is. Here's how it's going to play out. There'll be a meeting on the 10th of November, and again, depending upon when this program airs.
Okay.
But and we can cover it at the next meeting of the regular council. We can talk about the budget. But there will be a public hearing on the budget that you should all know about on Wednesday, the 30th of November, probably at 6 o'clock. And that will be your chance to weigh in. I mean, you can always weigh in. All during this entire fall, we like to have people weigh in on what they think about our taxing and spending. But that will be the last kick at the can, so to speak, to decide if we want to make changes, to reduce spending, to do whatever.
Well, and we should point out, though, every meeting has call to order, pledge of allegiance, then citizens' comments.
Yeah.
Every meeting has it. So you don't have to wait for a public hearing.
You don't, and that can be any topic. Literally
Right.
any topic, from needing to have a better traffic control on the road in front of your home to the budget.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it. It's a busy time. I think we're getting near the end. This is the first time in my 12 years, Mike, I can ever remember having five budget meetings.
Yeah.
Normal for us would be 2, maybe 3, but it's been a challenging year.
Well, it's been a challenging year because of things that are sort of beyond the control of the city, right? But then it's been a challenging couple of years because $1 million here, $1 million here. We've missed a few things.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of everything.
Well, it is, and we've had a hard time refilling positions. That's one of the reasons why we can delay refilling them now. It's good that we can save a little money by not refilling positions. It's bad that we're having trouble anyway finding these people. I mean, we've had ever since Josh Miller left back in March, we've been without a director of the department that oversees economic development and planning. That's not considered to be a good thing. So we have some struggles, but we're trying to work.
Is that on the list? You're not
we're
looking at cutting it,
No,
are
we're
you?
figuring that we're going to go through February without that person. Not that we're trying to, but that's our best estimate before we can get somebody on board the way things are going.
And that's a salary and benefit package of what, 90?
Yeah, 100, whatever.
100?
I mean,
and you can't find anyone?
Yeah, it's.
I'll do it.
Yeah, no. I mean,
no, I'm not qualified, but you know what I mean.
But the salary.
Wow.
The position, the salary has in that 90,000 plus range.
Yeah.
But it's more that it's a very difficult market. I'm not sure I fully understand it. I've talked to HR professionals and I've said, we're having a hard time finding people at all levels of the organization, and the response I get is, yeah, so is everybody.
Wow.
So I'm not sure if it's a combination of unemployment being low, if people aren't really looking to move from job to job now, but we're not getting a lot of applicants right now.
Okay. Just do what we have to do, more with less, right?
Yeah.
You got to do that too. You got to add that onto your. Oh, by the way, Steve.
I get that. Sometimes I think I'd like to talk to the person who said that.
Yeah, I know.
And say, what? I know you meant well, but there is a breaking point.
Yeah.
But you know what? To a degree, that there's truth to that.
Okay. So stay tuned, as we always say. We'll know more on the, I don't know if we're going to do this the day before Thanksgiving or not, but.
I'd like to.
Okay.
I'd like to. We could cover both the budget and the regular meeting of the 22nd.
Because there's a council meeting that week, right?
Correct.
So we'll be here. The city does not take a holiday.
No.
We must move forward.
We go right on.
We keep auditing ourselves.
We
All
do.
right. While you vet that,
All right.
take a vested interest in our next program, I'll be here.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yep.
I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'm Steve Barg, the City Administrator. On behalf of everybody connected with the City of Marshfield, thanks for watching, and we'll be with you next time here on Post-Council Meeting News Conference.